Hi, I'm Scott MacGregor. I've been a horse trainer for the last 40 years, and I want to do a little presentation on the MacGregor that are sold at Winter Circle in Shelbyville, Tennessee. As I was viewing the industry and developing horses, both trotting and gaited, I discovered that there were some holes that were left out of coverage that the bits on the market basically were designed to deal with. Now, obviously you'll see that I've got 5 curb bits in front of me. In my opinion, you can find any snaffle design that your heart desires, and they're just not hard to find. I mean, you can go to the big tack stores in Texas and find Western style snaffles, and you can go to dressage extensions and find English ones or Dover. So the snaffles didn't really interest me in design. What I was mostly looking for was, as you go with the curb bit functions, the rotational effect of the curb bit functions against a fulcrum creating torque, how could you do so in a manner that was non-threatening to the horse and yet initiated enough power in the horse's mouth to coax him to follow that rotational power, that rotational effect. So anytime you're dealing with a lever, the longer the lever, the more pressure it can create, thus the more damage it can create. So you'll see that most of these bits on the table are anywhere from 3.5 inches to 7. I found through my 40 years of training that anything that went over 7 began to cause a secondary influence on the horse, and that was that the pain was capable of overriding the thought process that the horse needed to follow the communication of the bit. So while you could easily force the horse to do something with a longer shank bit, you sacrificed in your communication skills with the horse by overwhelming the mouth through the torque. So is that provable? It's not, but any horseman that's been involved in the horse industry for decades will discover at some point that less can often be more. You're trying to communicate to the horse. You're trying to teach a horse a language of movement with a piece of metal in their mouth that communicates very specific things. And as the bit rotates, you want the horse to follow that rotation down into roundness, meaning down into an athletic position. This frees the horse's body up to maximize potential output, which we would deem useful in showing. You want the horse to animate. You want the horse to sliding stop. You want the horse to extend in a beautiful extended trot across the long diagonal. Each of these things requires athletic positioning to maximize motion, which we're usually judged on in competition. So when you're going that route, you have 2 sides of the coin. Do I force action, or do I teach the action as a partner? So what you find out very quickly in training is that if you're able to teach a horse to follow a language of movement and communication, that they will choose to do more than you can force them to do. So you attain the benefits of you actually have a living and breathing partner that very quickly analyzes what you're trying to do and kicks in his own initiation. So we've proven that the horse is the greatest animal puzzle solver in the animal kingdom. That's via a Cambridge 1991 university study that studied a huge amount of animals and ranked the top 25. The horse came in as the 5th smartest animal on the planet, with the dog being 7th. So you have to look up the rest of them, because this is not about that. But the idea that you could teach a smart animal to follow cues obviously became very useful as the world advanced into warfare with the horses. So like all good inventions, if they're not any good in war, they don't tend to be any good and don't get money spent on them, so they evaporate. But fortunately for us, the horse was useful in war for a couple thousand years, so we benefited from a consistent advancement of unique equipment that allowed the horse to do incredible things. As wars have ended because of the machine gun, as far as the usefulness of the horse go, we changed it to the hobby horse industry, which ironically now has more horses in the world than there were when we were actually using them for war and transportation. And as the hobby industry grew, so did our humanity toward the horse grow, where we wanted to develop language, we wanted to develop a systematic communication that enabled the horse to learn at the fastest possible speed, but functionally in the manner that he would retain the information over long periods of time, and thus became the study of dressage. Now, dressage is mentioned all the way back in the writings of Xenophon, 475 BC, but really came to focus in the mid-1500s in Spain. And from that point forward, it grew pretty rapidly, mostly because of wealthy Europeans having court horses that were trained for war, were trained in the airs above the ground, were trained in general war movements. And so when the wealthy people would come to visit each other, it's like, come to the barn, come and look at my horses. And essentially the movements found in dressage, or the high school movements, were all developed for, some of them were for showing off, but they say they have practical reasons. There's a couple of them that probably don't, but they were pretty. Modern dressage took the stuff out, like leaping out and kicking your back feet out, which might have been useful to clear a line. It doesn't have any use in competition. So what they went with is they tried to go with everything that a horse would do by itself when turned out in a field, and then train it to be the best athletic movement possible. So you take all of that information, and as I was dealing with gaited horses and Western horses, it became obvious that there were some things lacking. One of the things that I found with Western tack is the bits tend to be long, 8 inches long, and solid, so there was no joints in them, so they were unforgiving. And there's a reason for that. When you're neck reining, you aren't really doing a lot with the mouth. But then you get into a sport like Western dressage, trail riding, other gaited horses where you're riding two hands on a curved bit, then everything changed. Now you're using a curved bit very specifically to teach very specific things. So these bits that are on the table are all designed to fill a niche that I felt was missing. And we'll start with my favorite. So this is the MacGregor J shank. It is somewhat similar to a Kimberwick in the way that it feels to the horse. It was designed specifically for Western dressage, secondarily for trail riding, which I actually use it for trail riding almost exclusively. But for Western dressage, the bits weren't small enough, so you were getting a little bit of resistance because the bit was simply long enough to overwhelm the horse's desire to follow the communication. So once, like I said, once you get to 7 inches and over, you start losing communication and you start building some resistance because the bit's not comfortable. I'm not going to say it hurts, but it's definitely creating pressures that the horse would prefer to avoid. So you want to come up with a tool that deals with curb pressure to teach the rotational effect, right? The bit rotates, get out of the way. The bit rotates, and the horse feels that rotation. The curb chain obviously creates leverage, and the horse follows the bit down into roundness. So this is the J shank. It's the smallest shanked curb bit that I was able to come across. Obviously designed it. I tried everything I could find that was small, and they just didn't work. And when I came up with this design, I actually found it to be as effective as bits that were 6 and 7 inches long. It just communicates extremely effectively. The feature that you can see that I call the J shank, it allows the bit to not have an L design, which tends to compress, it has more of a rolling effect that allows it to get the horse to come out to the bit and take the bit down. So it was designed for a couple reasons, but the main thing is it doesn't compress the horse. It's able to teach the horse to round a nice soft contact. It's enough of a challenge to the horse that they don't tend to just bear into it. It communicates like any other curb bit, and you're looking for very light contact. You're looking for very consistent and response to the aids, and this being obviously involved with the rein aids. So that's the J shank. It's for sale at Winter Circle in Shelbyville, Tennessee. As I was designing the J shank, I was using all sorts of different designs, and this is the other one that came out of the exact same test bit group. I had made a fairly big group of bits, and both of them worked. And this one is called a 4-ring, MacGregor 4-ring, also for sale at Winter Circle. You can see that the rings are 3 rings straight up and down with the mouthpiece connected to the center one and a lower ring that's slightly back. So why? Again, I wanted to get some rotational effect of having the drop back shank design, but on the trail, one of the things that you can run into trouble with is that a horse might start curling. A horse might start going with his head too low. And I wanted the option to be able to change the position that the reins could be attached to and yet still have a small, lightweight design. The other feature on this bit, it is connected to a center post on the second ring. You can also see that it has a shaped mouthpiece, so it's designed to fit in the mouth nice and smoothly on an arc. But the main thing is that the shank is attached through a post. So that post creates a nice tight joint here, and the top of the post holds the lip corner out of any pinching that might occur. There's no movement in here particularly. It's pretty tight design. You can see that it's pretty tight. So there's no pinching that can occur on the bit. It has stood up to all sorts of testing on the trail. I found both bits were super good for endurance because they're not heavy. They don't interfere with the horse. They can be ridden on a nice soft contact, even though they're small, with adequate results, maintaining roundness, balance, and not overwhelming the horse to compress. Obviously, endurance horses you want to lengthen into long strides. So both bits were really functional in that sport. I've been really super excited that the J shank went on to Tevis 2 years ago. We've used it all throughout the Southeast on 50-mile rides. So those are the 2 bits that I think they're good for young horses. They're good for trail riding, and this one in particular is really good for Western dressage. Western dressage does allow curved bits. Otherwise, it's almost exactly the same sport as dressage, traditional dressage, and judged pretty much by the same people. To get into a bar bit design, this is a MacGregor releasing bit. You'll notice that the first 2 bits had a single joint. I found the single joint more effective than the double joint, which is why I don't have any double jointed designs. The double joint unfortunately puts the 2 joints right on top of the horse's bars, and the horse's bars are about as wide as your 2 middle fingers, so that when the bit rotates, right, when the bit rotates, that mouthpiece, it rotates the joints right on top of the bars, where the center joint rotates to the tongue, and the tongue is obviously much more pliable than the jawbone of the horse. So you don't tend to run into problems if the curb chains are adjusted correctly so that the bits only rotate 30 degrees. You just don't run into problems with a single joint, whereas the double joint, there are some circumstances where those joints can actually get into interference with the horse's bars. That's the fine bone ridges on top of the lower jawbone. So this is the first bar bit that I'm showing you today, and it is the MacGregor releasing bit. You can see it has a very, very unusual design. So there was a military bit that was used in the 1890s in Europe, mostly Germany, that had a half circle with a ring back here. And I thought it was interesting, but that was about it. It's actually in some of the books that I'll show later on. As I open this half circle, as you see, to this new angle, the rein would come in at an angle if the horse's head was up, but once the horse rounded, the bottom of the shank would align with the ring, and it would release about half of the torque to the horse's mouth. So as the bit rotates, it literally rewards the horse for doing what the bit was telling him to do in the first place. Now, I already mentioned how good at puzzle solvers they are. The horse only has to feel that a few times and realize, well, if I put my head here, all the torque goes away and it's soft on my mouth. So is this bit good for all horses? I was asked that at a recent clinic, and the answer is no. A horse actually has to not mind a bar mouthpiece. I did not find that the bit worked very well with a jointed mouthpiece. So on this design, it works fantastic if the horse is comfortable with a bar mouthpiece. Now it's a nice mullen, it's a shaped bar. The bar is actually at a 45-degree angle, so that as the bit rotates, it actually rotates off of the bars, off of the tongue. It's obviously subtle, but it's some. And that it's basically become the best bar-style curb bit that I've ever used. For the gaited horses, it's done miracles. It enhances the gait tremendously. It's used in the show ring very effectively by my peers, and I'm super pleased with this design. It's one of the oldest designs that I still use. The first design of that bit was actually bigger. I still do sell the bigger bit because some people did like it. It's 7 inches versus 5. I think that the reason that this bit survived is because people could feel the release so much when it was slightly bigger. Otherwise, it works exactly the same. If I put them one up to the other, you can see the size difference is pretty substantial. But the way that they work is almost identical. This one's a great bit to start with because you can feel it work so effectively, and it's a bit that quarter horses really liked. The gaited horses really liked it, so I think this one will have a lot of use for many years. They're both called the releasing bit. When you go on the Winter Circle site, you'll click on a button that says releasing bit, and then you'll have a choice between the size. That's completely up to you. I don't think, in my honest opinion, that the horse can tell the difference. There is some more torque in the one, but there's also more release. So you just have to decide what's best for you. My last bit was the second bit I ever designed. I designed this bit 38 years ago. That's kind of scary. It went through at least 9 different designs before I came to this particular one that I felt comfortable putting out on the market. Now, the first thing that you're going to notice, it has 2 mouthpieces. There's a very good reason for that, and it was not to make it harsh. It was actually to make it soft. If you put this bit in your hand, you can feel that it disperses pressure over a very wide area. I said this is a rehab bit. It's called the remouthing bit, and the reason why I gave it that specific name, I wanted people to realize that it did something very special. When a horse bruises its mouth, causing damage, ulcers in the mouth, or worse, there's going to be a scar left behind, and the scar is going to be a dead spot. And unfortunately, in our efforts to work with horses, we make mistakes and horses get injured. And I wanted a bit that was able to deal with these injured horses. I had horses coming in over my longer career that simply couldn't use a normal bit. They couldn't feel enough to use a normal bit, or they had you know, they had a big crevice in their tongue, or their bars were broken down. But let's just justify and say, thankfully, that I probably wasn't the cause of that. At least I certainly tried my whole career not to be. But I wanted to give people the ability to find solutions to how can I make my horse able to work when he has mouth damage. So this bit was designed, like I said, this is probably the 9th design of it. Has a couple interesting features. You'll see that the mouthpiece is hooked on inside rings so that it also creates no pinching. The mouthpiece is in a plane so that when I rotate that plane, you can clearly see that it would be almost obvious to the horse to follow that rotation. And it is. It's surprisingly obvious to the horse. They start feeling that plane of rotation, and within minutes, they just follow the plane of rotation. Another thing is that the top mouthpiece places the bit in the mouth. So the bit can't go any higher than it would normally go, and that's where the top mouthpiece rides. The bottom mouthpiece rides below that by a little under an inch. And when it's working in the mouth, that bottom mouthpiece goes just below the previous injured area. So it gives a horse a chance to use tissues that aren't damaged, that he can relearn how to communicate and obviously enter into a productive relationship with his rider again. I get tons of questions about this bit until people actually use it, and they're like, wow, it's like miraculous how easy it works and how soft it is. Most of the time that a person says that they're shocked about how soft a bit is, it's because the horse is afraid of the bit. It's built too thin, it's built too rough. This is all built with very soft bars. The joints are small, so they're almost the same size as the bars. So there's as little protruding area as possible so that it can shape to the mouth and then work off that planular rotation effect. So when this bit necessary? Now, a couple of my top show horses like it because it communicates so well. So they just like it. They don't want to use anything else. It's useful anytime a horse has had a problem in the mouth where it's caused damage. It's useful when they have a bruise, because it basically goes away from that area and uses a new area. It also is effective on the trail, ironically. You would think that it potentially could be too big for the trail, but because of how much pressure it can disperse into multiple areas, it never creates a hot spot in the mouth. So that's become very useful, because when a bit's sitting in a horse's mouth for 4 hours and things aren't going perfectly, it's very easy to get a hot spot, and the horse starts leaning into that hot spot, and this tends to prevent that completely. So that's basically an overview of how my bits are working. I'm going to add into this video an example of how each of them look in the mouth, show off how the releasing bit actually aligns. But you'll see each of these bits placed in the horse's mouth on the second part of the video. Please stay tuned, and we'll finish that up pretty quickly.